Okay, so it's February of 2019, and we are in Buenos Aires. It's a warm night, it's summer in Buenos Aires in February, and I'm hosting a dinner at home. So I have 20 people for dinner, and since I don't have like a lot of plates of the same set, I'm using my grandmother's plate. So those plates are simple plates, like a kind of a cream color and a golden border, but very simple plates. But those plates were from in my family for 70 years. So we started dinner, and you know how it's like these kind of events, like talking to the people, going from the kitchen, like serving appetizers. So a bit of rush, and in the middle of the dinner, there's a small accident, and a pile of 5 plates fell into the floor and get broken. So in that moment, the times, for me, it's like the time stops. And those plates, maybe I can tell you the story about those plates. Those plates belong to my grandparents. Those grandparents were from Poland. Actually, the 4 of my grandparents were from Poland. But the owners of these plates were Hanna and Joel. They were from Stoczek in Mazowiecki region. So when the war started, when the Germans invaded Poland, they left Stoczek to Białystok to the east. Then they were like taken by the Soviets and deported to Siberia. They spent the whole war in Siberia. They managed to survive, and then after the war managed to return to Poland. And when they returned, they discovered that there were no more relatives, that everybody was killed. They perished in Treblinka. So yeah, the only thing that my grandparents, Joel and Hanna, my grandparents had was, my grandfather had a brother in Argentina that he was there before the war, so this is why they end up in Argentina. So in my family, you know, they never wanted to talk about Poland. They never wanted to talk about their life in Poland. They never wanted to return or know anything. It was like a taboo topic, and also we didn't talk that much about with my father. So now the plates are broken, and for me it's like a tragedy. That was one of the only memories I have from my grandmother, one of the only things, and I think how to fix them. You know, I need to do something. After the dinner, I called my parents. I broke 5 of those plates, and they said, "Don't worry, no, it's like I have to do something with this." So that night, I couldn't sleep, and I came up with an idea. I said, "Okay, I know what I'm going to do. I will go for the first time to Poland, for the first time to my grandparents' villages. I will take a broken piece, write a message, and leave it like a memorial." So after a while, after a few days, I thought, okay, why should it be only about my family? What if I ask the people in Argentina or Latin America in social media to write me and tell me where their great parents came from in Eastern Europe, and I make a trip doing memorials with broken plates. So this is how it started. You know, at the beginning, I started in Bulgaria in 2019, and when the project started, all the questions like started too. It's like, what is to make a memorial? How should I do it? And how should I show this in social media? How should I share these memorials? And can I decide what to do and what not? It's like if someone writes me, I should go, or what kind of questions should I ask to those grandsons and daughters who contact me? How can I establish this communication channel? And at the same time, who's going to be interested in this? Like, who's going to be interested in following these memorials, the stories of grandparents from strangers? And also there were a lot of questions, also the logistics questions. You know, I'm traveling in a country that I've never been, Bulgaria, after Romania, and it's like, and how is to reach those towns and villages? You know, there's something that in Argentina, people believe that, we believe that in Europe, everything is close, right? So it's like, oh yeah, I heard that you are in Bucharest. My grandfather, he was from Minsk. if it's on your way, can you go? Well, it's like two different countries, like, well, but if it's in your way, you just like, no, and nothing is in the way, everything is like, and usually our grandparents came from small village lost in the middle of nowhere or with very hard connections. I remember one of the first memorials that I did was, well, that was in Romania, but so it was the grandfather Emilio, and I had to go to a small village in the mountains in the north of Romania. So I was in the south, and when I asked my friends, they are like, how can I go into this place? It was called Vișeu de Sus. They say, no, it's from here, you cannot go there. But no, it's impossible. But there's people living there, so it must be a way. If there's people living, so apparently there was no trains, or I had to. It took me the whole day with connections, like hitchhiking, buses. So it took me the whole day, and I arrived not into the village, but in the last town before reaching there. I arrived 11 at night, 11 p.m. So I found a place where to sleep, a hotel, and I said, okay, I will spend the night here, and tomorrow I will figure out how to get into this village. So in my mind, the memorial was, okay, tomorrow I have to find a bus. I don't know where, I cannot stay there, so I have to take a bus, leave a broken plate, do some photos and videos, and return. So the next morning, I received a call, like Romanian number in my phone. So, it's like strange, like, who is calling me in Romania? And, so I pick up the phone and there's a voice. It says, hello, Dan? I was like, yes. My name is Dragos. Okay, for me, like in that moment, Dragos sounds like, like a, I don't know, like a Mortal Kombat fighter, tattoo, this man, like this voice, he was a man. And it's like, somebody told me that you are coming to Vișeu de Sus. I was like, yes, I'm from Vișeu de Sos, the village next to it. Do you need any help? I was like, actually, yes. I don't know how. So he first, he had my contact from a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend in the south of Romania. And he explained me how to go. He said, you have to take a bus, in this town that you are. And there's no way to you have to stop, you have to get off in the middle of the road when you see the gas station at this crossing so get off there, I will pick you up. It was a stranger, but I trust to that voice in the phone, and I did it. I took this bus, I crossed the mountains, and suddenly I saw this gas station, went off. And I was okay, and I have to wait for someone, I don't know, and what I'm waiting. So cars were stopping there, and I was looking who looks like a Dragos there. And suddenly there was this car with a lady driving, and there was like a young guy, like a kid, in the front seat. So he went down and said, Dan? I said, Dragos. So Dragos was like a 17-year-old kid. And I went into their car, and they start to ask me, why are you here? What you are looking for? Why you come here? So I told the story about this grandfather, the project, and he explained to his mother in Romania. And actually, he asked his mother, he didn't have a driving license, so this is why his mother was driving him to pick me up. So he explained her, and they discussed in Romania and said, so where are you staying? I don't know. Okay, we have an empty house near our house. You can stay there as long as you can. 1 week, it's okay? I was like, yeah, sure. So at the end, I stayed the whole week with them, with this family, and they helped me to find information about this grandfather Emilio, but also they showed me around. They gave me a plate from their house to make the memorial. And in that moment, I discovered there was an important, that was at the beginning of the project, and I discovered that this project is like multidimensional, that involves like different actors who dialogue in time. It's not only about these grandparents who are not here anymore, it's also about the locals who live in these towns and villages now that get involved and help me and are part of those stories. So it's like the granddaughters and grandsons or relatives that are in Argentina or South America, these grandparents that are not here anymore, their traces in the region and locals, so all are connected. So, well, after that, yeah, the trip continues to Romania, Moldova, Ukraine, and until I was like doing memorials, learning about this, until I get into the border, between Ukraine and Poland. I was in the last town before going to Poland. So at that moment, at that point of the project, like, something changed. I met there with my sister. She was in Europe, and we met there to go together to our grandparents' villages. But for the first time, that border was different. I crossed a lot of borders in my life, and at that point I already I don't know I had done like some memorials, but for the first time that border was my history, my past, and the villages of my grandparents, the whole point of this project. And for me, there's my idea of Poland. I was terrified. I was scared, like entering to Poland. My idea of Poland, and the idea of many people in Argentina, or maybe in South America, or maybe in the world who never been in Poland. It's like, okay, this is like a gray country, gray buildings, gray sky, cloudy sky, concentration camps, and what I'm gonna say to the people there, like that I'm Polish. In that moment I was, my citizenship was in process, so I was becoming Polish also, without putting a step in Poland, and I was afraid that people were asking me like, so what are you doing here? And say that my grandparents were from Poland. They were like, so you are Jewish, and so you are Polish. So okay, speaking Polish, So there were like a lot of situations in my mind. So yeah, that border, that moment of the project was like very important for me. So I remember that we were in Novovolinsk in Ukraine, and we just took a bus, like to the first town that was after that border. It was Zamość. So my first impression of Poland, with this idea of gray buildings, so we arrived in this old town with beautiful and colorful Italian-style houses. It was a sunny day, and we were hosted by this girl and her mother. This girl who was a Spanish teacher, so she was speaking to us in Spanish, and her mother, and they host us in their house. And they were so friendly, and we entered to the house, and they start to serve some cakes and tea and liquors, and this apple cake, charlotka, that So I was smelling like the food that my grandmother was cooking, and they asked us, "What are you doing here?" So I told the story about my project, the broken plates, our grandparents, and she said, "So you are Polish then?" It was the first time that somebody in Poland said to me that I was Polish, that recognized me as Polish. So after that, well, they help us a lot also to find information.
I have to ask you, how did it feel to be called Polish?
Well, I was shocked. I don't know if the word is shocked, but it was strange. Like it was like a new me appearing. So it was like I was never called like I never thought about being Polish until this moment of my life, and if somebody in Poland says, "So you are Polish?" It was like another me coming out there, but that after that, well, they help us to go to Istvica, that is the town where my mother, father town. So and after that they invite us to the school where they work, like because this girl was a Spanish teacher in a high school. Her mother was a director there, so they invite us to the school. So after 3 days in Poland, with this idea of how it's gonna be, we're in front of a class, like in front of students, talking about Argentina, about our roots. And I remember very well this day because at the end they were asking questions, and one girl, I think probably she was 14 years old, 15, she asked, "So what means for you being Polish?" No? And she also asked, "And do you imagine yourself living here?" In that moment, I didn't know what to answer to her. So after so much, well, the trip developed. I start to, expand my vision of Poland. I was like, I think I visited more than 40 or 50 towns, cities, villages in Poland, and I was going from small villages to important cities. I was like being hosted by local people. I received invitation for baptism, weddings, bestseller. And I was like passing from picking potatoes in a field with a family to networking events in towers in Warsaw. So visiting museums, events, conferences. So I was like expanding my vision of Poland, seeing like different stories, perspective, meeting people who also wanted to share me their own story. People in Poland who were helping me to go to these towns or villages who were becoming part of the project, but at the same time, they wanted to tell me their story about their grandparents. So, as like, as how so I think projects are written in paper, but you feel the sense or develop when you are on the road. When you once you start, like ideas takes shapes when you put them into action. So as long as I was moving and discovering this new Poland, I was also discovering about what I'm doing here, what's this project about. And I was discovering the meaning of what is to do a memorial. So at the beginning, all my energy was in the plate, because what I was doing, the memorial was leaving a broken plate in somewhere in the towns or the cities. Usually I was trying to find a place representative of the story of this person, what the grandsons and daughters were telling me, or if this person was Jewish, I was trying to find a Jewish cemetery, sometimes maybe in a train station, sometimes in a park. I was trying to find a place, and I was also stressed what is going to happen with this place after, if somebody's going to take it, remove it. I was very stressed about this. I was very stressed about what to write and paint in the plate. So I was taking some time to think, what should I draw if I will intervene and draw something there. I like to do something also representative to their story, their life. I was writing the names of these people, and also that was an important point, because sometimes those names, I was writing them in Hebrew, sometimes like in Spanish, and that was another point of identity. Like some people wanted me to write them, I don't know, like Bove or Babcha Sarah, and Sarah in Hebrew. But for many people, their grandparents, these grandparents, when they migrate to Argentina, they choose a Spanish name. Actually, my grandmother, in my mother's side, we always call her Matilde. For me, it's like Baba Matilde. And I cannot imagine her with another name. So her Yiddish name, her Hebrew name, for me, my connection with her is through her name in Spanish. So for many people, also, that was an important point, like how should I write the name of this person in a plate? Should be in Spanish or Yiddish? And I was asking this to these relatives in Argentina, and some people choose no. For me, it was always Emilio. So I want this name in Spanish. And for other people, write them if I write these names in Yiddish or Hebrew, they felt more, that the memorial was about their life in Poland or about the Jewish heritage. So they prefer, so all the energy, all the stress, all the effort was in make a beautiful plate to live somewhere and wish and hope that nobody will remove this. But after, I spent some time traveling and doing these memorials, I discovered that the plate was not only the memorial, there was much more happening around. There was an art curator in Argentina who told me, the act of memory is everything. So since the moment a granddaughter or grandson contact me, and the process where they start to sharing me their story, that's already the memorial. And all the trip to this village and what happens there is also part of the memorial, and also the telling of these stories after, maybe in different narrative formats in social media. This is also part of the memorial. So there was this memorial, Bove Sara, in Parchev. So there was his grandson, called Pablo. So he contacted me and he asked me for a memorial, and he started to telling me a lot. He was sending me audios, like WhatsApp audios about her grandmother. And after he talked about this with his sister and mother, and he started to resend their audio. So I had testimonies from the relatives, that they were telling stories or memories of her. So that was already part of the memorial. And after a while, I was already in Poland, so we were talking by WhatsApp, and he told me that the birthday of his grandmother, for the date of the anniversary, she's already dead, but for the anniversary of her birthday, because of all this that happened with the memorial, with the project, they decided to go to a park and to go make a picnic to celebrate this birthday and tell stories about her. So that was also part of the memorial. So an interesting thing was that they share me. So this grandmother, this Bove Sara, she had a diary or memories of her life. So she wrote from the moment she was a child in Parchev, and then the ship that brought her across the Atlantic to Argentina, and all her life in Argentina until she turned 87 or 88 years old. So her granddaughter, Luciana, sister of Pablo, she recorded herself reading this diary, and she sent me an audio of all this diary recorded by her. She read it in first person, as her grandmother wrote it. So I had the story. So I heard it a few times, but when I went to Parchev, I decided to walk in the city hearing this story, this audio. So I was walking. This diary started where I was born in a town called Parchev. So it was like Bove Sara talking through the voice of her granddaughter, and she was telling me her story. So she was talking about the night she had nightmares because she had an exam at school, and I was walking and passing by through the school, and she was telling about the well where they were going for water, about her own grandfather from Brisk that was coming and eating ice cream with her. So she was telling me the story, and I was walking there, and it looked like we were walking together. We were holding our arms, walking in Parchev. So in that moment, I thought, we brought her back. She's here. So, and I told them, for one day, we brought her back to Parchev. I think a memorial is like a spell, is to find in the absence of these towns or villages traces of their story and to bring them back for a while, maybe for one day, back to life, to those places. So I think this is what memory is about.
That's an amazing story. Like she was your guide in Parchev. But I was when you were telling about the diary, I was wondering in which languages it was
in
written.
Spanish. In Spanish.
But
So
if
so
she started as a little
yeah,
girl,
no, yeah,
probably
but I
was
think
Yiddish.
because they told me it was a diary, but I think it was a memory because of how it was written. It's strange because because some parts it was written in past, so it was a memory, but they said that she had a diary. So but I think it was more like a memory of
Yeah, a
her
memoir
life.
from the
Yes,
instance.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, would you like to continue or
Yes. No.
should I
Or
move to my questions?
let me think. Because I wanted to tell something else, and then the story of Shaya. In my mind, we talk about the plates. We talk that there's something else around this, and I wanted to talk. What's the impact in like this question? Who is gonna be interested? All what happened after, like people getting
Yeah. So maybe before we move to this impact and your outreach and how people contact you and how many people, families you commemorated, and maybe some more examples of these people, I wanted to ask because this is something that wasn't absolutely clear for me. So your first trip to Europe started in Bulgaria or in Poland?
In Bulgaria.
In Bulgaria. Okay, so you left Poland for the end of your trip?
Well, it was not the end, it was the middle, because I started in Bulgaria, then I went to Romania, then to Moldova, Ukraine, Poland. So when I arrived to Poland, the project started already. So, and then from Poland I went to Belarus, and from Belarus to Lithuania.
Okay, so before you started commemorating your own family, you managed to gather some group of people who wanted their families to be commemorated as well. So can you talk about this group? Who contacted you and how? How did they know that you are going to do such thing?
Yes, okay. So now I start with this, how it works or how...
Yes, and what year that was also, so we put it in time. Was it...
I started in 2019, but then I came back again. In 2019 I was almost 9 months traveling. Yeah, it was
Wow.
So usually it's like when I come it's for long periods, because all this takes time. Well, I didn't mention this, but to make a memorial is like, it's like a long process, and then going to those places, and I need to rest, it takes a lot of energy and absorbs all these stories. And at the same time, if sometimes people, if they are very welcoming, hospitalarian, is also exhausting, because you have a lot of people around and it's hard to process, it's hard to write, and they give you like a lot of Bimberg, a lot of like everything, food, and so takes time. As I told you in Romania, that I thought that I was gonna go for the day to Bisheu, go and return, and I spent 1 week. So sometimes happens that I stay for a week in a village or a town.
Yeah. So how these people knew that you have this idea?
So when I decided to start in 2019, I made a few posts in Instagram and social media, and sometimes in Facebook too. I was like, okay, I'm starting with this. If you have grandparents from this region and want a memorial, please write to me, and I could do it. So at the beginning, it was also a learning, because there were people, I didn't want this to be like research. Like, for me, doing a memorial is like, it's about the stories and giving some meaning to those stories. Do something to honor their memory. So it's not about finding new information for you. Sometimes happens because during this process and during these trips, I can find new information. But sometimes people write me only because they want information. And I try to be clear or say, this is not, I'm not a genealogist. I'm not, many people want to have papers for citizenships. So it's like I try to focus. I start to ask some questions and try to focus on the people who really want to do something to honor, like a small event or something to honor the memory or to resignify these stories. So sometimes people have information, sometimes they don't have any information. Sometimes when they don't have information, sometimes people think that, okay, I don't know anything, so we cannot make a memorial. I said, but are you sure you don't know anything? You met your grandmother, what memories you have? Like about her food, about, I don't know, what memories, what things did you share with her? All these counts. There's many people think that telling me about their grandparents is about giving like facts, like year where they were born, city, and I think for the memorials I try to take all the elements I can. It's like, and with all these elements, like a memorial also is like a creation, like create something with this. And sometimes it's, with the information I have, but sometimes it's with the people who host me, with what I see in those towns or villages, what happens. I take everything, and with this, we try to create a meaning to honor these memories. So sometimes there's more or less information. Sometimes they contact me through emails. Sometimes after the email, they open themselves and they want to talk a lot. And I give them my WhatsApp. And we start to exchange like audios and stories. And sometimes I became friends. For me, it's like I get involved with these families. And it's not easy. It's like first, I know all these people, like relatives, like a family tree. I have to learn this, but at the same time, it's not easy because sometimes they're like sad stories and very traumatic stories. And I have to absorb all this, and also it's hard for me, but at the same time it's beautiful and it's strange because I feel I'm related to these people and I don't know them. And sometimes happens after these trips, because I started in 2019, but from that time until 2024 I came several times, so I was coming and going back to Argentina. So sometimes happens that after coming back to Argentina, I met for the first time some of these grandsons and granddaughters who invite me for dinner to their home. So it's, it's like also being part of these families. And also for me, it's like special. It's like I discovered the story of their grandparents and all their life in Poland or Eastern Europe. And then the outcome, the result, what happened after, because it's like, all the story of Pobe Sara when she was a child in Parchev, and then she migrated to Argentina, and somehow she overcome to everything, to all what happened in Europe, to her family, and she started a new life, and she created her own family in Argentina, and suddenly I'm sitting there seeing like how her story continue, because this family folks invite me to her house for dinner, and I share with them the dinner, and we were talking about her grandmother and about what happened in Parchev. So it's like a lot of things happening from this.
So you feel that your commemoration changes something in those families, or their perception of those places their families come from?
Sometimes yes, sometimes there's many things that we don't know about. For example, this about the distances, but also like there's a lot of misconceptions, misunderstandings, misinformations, or like or not a will to know about this. You know, it's like for their grandparents were very traumatic experiences and they didn't want to talk. So maybe the ideas are very like, you know, like I don't want to hear about this. So they are kind of curious. They want me to go to the village or town, but at the same time it's like, yeah, but I don't care. I want, but I don't care. Well, don't tell me, but don't tell me. So sometimes it changed. Like people start to be more open to know, to see, because also my way of doing this commemoration and this traveling is like to show different perspectives. Like, maybe you can come to Poland and go to Auschwitz, and from Auschwitz go to, I don't know, and you will have maybe one view of Poland more accurate to the stories or the stereotypes we are used to hear. But then when I go, I don't know, I've been hosted with a family and I go to the forest and I go to Bieszczady Mountains and then I meet people in Krakow, in Warsaw, in Wrocław, and you know, I create bonds and I can listen to new stories. I think this all also opens, like gives a new perspective, and many people discover with this like a new vision of Poland, as I discover also. So I think this is like, you know, maybe this is my nature to try to find like a positive and like people who are interested about these stories, people who want to help, people who can show also a different perspective of Poland and of all these stories. For me, it's important to find these people and find people who show interest.
And do they join you for the trips?
Sometimes yes. Sometimes they say, "Yeah, I take you with my car. You know, let's go." Sometimes they want to do this memorial together. So there's this story that maybe is good that synthesize a bit of what we are talking about, the commemorations and these approaches. And so there was this grandfather, Shaye. He was from Sokołów Podlaski. So he migrated to Argentina in the year, I think was 1938 or 37 maybe, as he had a 5-year-old daughter, Anka, and a wife, and he migrated by himself. You know, it was common at the time that usually, he migrated himself to find a job, establish, and then bring the family. But the war started, in between. So he managed to bring them, and her 5-year-old daughter, Anka, and his wife perished in Treblinka. So this man suddenly is alone in Argentina without a family, and he continued, he moved on. I don't know how he did it, but he moved on and he formed a new family there. So from this new family, there's this granddaughter, Maya, who contacted me. So is she the one who tell me the whole story? But it's also at the same time, for me, it was like a, very strong story. Like, I mean, this man had 2 different lives. One life in Poland with a family, another life in Argentina with a new family. It's like 2 different worlds that never crossed. And now this granddaughter Maya, she wants to know more about this. She wants to make this memorial commemoration. And since she's a journalist and an illustrator, I asked her, I say, okay, maybe you can make a drawing of your grandfather and I will take it to Sokołów Podlaski. So she found a photo. She went to her father's house and found a photo of Shaye. I think it's the last photo that Shaye has with his 5-year-old daughter, Anka, and she made a drawing of the photo of her 5-year-old aunt, or kind of aunt that she never met. So she gave me this drawing and I took it to Poland. And in that moment, besides the broken plate, I also had commemoration, like a drawing made by the hand of the Shaye's granddaughter. So I feel like I cannot leave this like a broken plate. I need someone to keep this drawing, to preserve this. So I was trying to figure out how to do this commemoration, this memorial. So like try to find people in Sokołów before going there. So I was in a meeting in Krakow and talking to a girl. She said, oh, you know, I'm from Sokołów Podlaski. So I said, great, maybe you can help me. She gave me some contact of a teacher. We spoke a bit, but it was nothing clear. And I was, okay, I will go anyway, because usually things happen when I'm there. You know, you cannot plan that much, the commemoration. It's like, if I go, I know that something is going to happen. So I took a bus from Warsaw to Sokołów, and the bus dropped me in front of the building. Like I saw like a huge building, it says Dom Kultury. So I just like took a random photo to send to this girl in Krakow, like, hey, I'm in your town, I'm in Sokołów. So I sent her the photo, and she answered, like, oh, by the way, you know, now that I see this photo, I remember, maybe if it's still the same, the director of culture is called Marcin Zielinski. So I'm in Sokołów with my backpack, just arrived, and I decided to enter to Dom Kultury. So there's this receptionist, and she asked me, yeah, how can I help you? I said, I'm looking for Marcin Zielinski. Do you have an appointment? It's like, well, no. So does he know you? Well, not exactly. And do you know him? Well, no. So why you want to meet him? I was like, I don't know, but I want to meet him. So she took me to an office, and there's a secretary, and she asked me, what are you doing here, basically? And I told her, I tell her the whole story of the drawing, of my project, Maya, and she made a call, she's making a call, and she says, like, okay, wait here, in 10 minutes, Marcin Zielinski is gonna receive you in his office. So suddenly, after 10 minutes in Sokołów, I'm in the office of the director of culture, and with the drawing and with the coffee, waiting for him. I don't know how to start, what to say, but when he comes, he showed himself so enthusiastic. I told him the story, everything, like about my project, my grandparents, the broken plates, the drawing. Maybe even it was confusing because I said like everything together, but he started to make calls like to the archive, to the library, to the school. He canceled his day for showing me around. So he took me for lunch. He took me to a few spots with Jewish heritage. He showed me everything. And when we were talking to people, like he introduced me these guys from the archive. And I was always thinking, like, how should I ask and to who? Who is like, you know, I was thinking, who is the chosen one to preserve this drawing? So I was talking to people, walking and thinking. And, well, I spent the night there in a noclegi, and he said, oh, yeah, I pick you up tomorrow morning, 9 to go to the school. Okay. So the next day, we went to the school. And outside the school, there was like the director, you know, waiting in line outside the school. So it was like an official visit. The director, some professors, they welcomed me in a room full of cakes and coffee. So I was thinking, okay, there's something special here. Something's going on. And then, yeah, I realized that this visit was a school event. I was gonna talk in front of the whole school, maybe 90 or 100 students about this project. So I went into the stage. I asked to show a few videos, and I talked about the project, the stories, and I talked the story of grandfather Shaye and Maya and the drawing. And at the beginning, those students were shy. Then they start to ask some questions. At the end, they want selfies with me. So when everything was over, the director, she came and said, sorry, can I ask you what you are going to do with this drawing? Because for us, it will be an honor to keep it, to receive it. And I was like, I think for this family, for Maya and her family. It will be an honor if this drawing stays at school. So we improvised like a ceremony where I deliver, gave them the drawing. So I think that, you know, the memorial, the commemoration was everything. You know, that now there's 90, 100 or 100 students in Socouf that know the story of this grandfather. Somehow this grandfather returned to Socouf, reunited with this daughter, Anka, 5 years old daughter, and he's there in the school where he probably studied. And I think all this, and you know, and you were asking me about people who were showing me, taking me. So this director of culture who spent the whole day showing me places. And so I think all this, and when I was saying about create a new meaning or take elements to create, I think all the story that after I'm sharing in social media, this part of the commemoration. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And and there's people who, you know, the question that who is going to be interested in reading or following a project related to somebody else grandparent. Well, there's a lot of people who get identified with these stories, who help me. You know, because I for those trips I had a crowdfundings, and there's like people that maybe are not related to this family. Maybe they are completely, they don't know each other, but they collaborate maybe with 10 euros, 50 euros, 100 euros. So I can go to a village to do something for somebody else, to the grandfather, somebody they don't know. So there's a community, there's a lot of people get in touch by this. You know, sometimes people, for me, this is amazing people in social media write me and tell me about these grandparents by their names. You know, like, oh yeah, Abuelo Emilio, Bobe Sara, you know, like they know these grandparents also, like if they were their own grandparents. And I think this is the best commemoration. This is the best way to honor their memory. And there's also many people that you asked me about if they change the perception of Poland. There's many people that maybe they want to know that much, or they see this from some distance. But after I tell a story, like, I don't know, Shaya, they start to get interested. They start to get something wake up in them, and maybe they start to dig a bit in their own history. Maybe they want to know, and I think this is also like an effect of this.
And project. These are people from your generation or older? Do you see some kind of pattern? What age are those people?
It's a mix. Sometimes it's people. It's strange because sometimes it's young people, maybe 20, 25 years old, and for them it's like a great grandparents. Sometimes it's people from my generation, and it's like a grandparent. Maybe most of them are like my generation, but there's also older people like that they are talking about the stories of their own parents. So this is even closer, like what happened to them with the pain, the emotions, sometimes I talk and sometimes, you know, it's interesting, but sometimes it's like a grandson or a granddaughter who start this memorial, but then their parents get involved, and I have the whole family. So it's like we are talking about grandparents or maybe the parents of someone who is who wants this memorial. And sometimes it's people, you know, so it is also interesting that many people maybe they don't have roots in Poland or Eastern Europe. They have roots in Italy or Spain, but they are also like reflected by these stories.
Mm-hmm. And so what is the geographical scope of your project? Eastern Europe?
Yes. I started with Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and yeah. After last year, I went for the first time. I did for the first time a few memorials in Slovakia, and I did also in Latvia. So yeah, but in the last 3 years, I was more focused in Poland and Lithuania.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so coming back to the plates, so I understand that there were 5 plates that broken, and have you used all the pieces already?
No, I took 4 pieces with me, or maybe it was 5 pieces that I took in my first trip, and I used them for the memorials. And then I left a few pieces in Argentina. One, I use it for now, like promoting the project. Every time I have to make a photo, I have this original plate with me for this. But then for the people who ask me for memorials, I use plates, not my grandparents' plates, because yeah, it's like one thing about this project is like it's not easy to carry plates, unbroken plates in your backpack. So no, I usually there's a nice tradition or ritual that many times local people who host me or who are getting part, they take a plate from their house, and they are in charge of breaking these plates, and I use these pieces. So yeah.
And then you draw something on these pieces,
yeah,
right? So can you tell me something about the technique you are using and what you mentioned names, but there is also some decorative pattern from what I remember.
Yes.
So can you tell about the material artistic aspects of
I use like markers, usually black. Sometimes I use color markers, but I prefer only one color, and I use black. And I try to improve my calligraphy to write the names. Usually I search like calligraphies, like typos in internet related to more my old style or artistic style. But it's not that easy to write or draw in a surface of a plate. So also depends on the plate. I try to use like a plain plate without any stamp or inscription or nothing, so it's easier. And sometimes I do some abstract patterns. Sometimes I draw some flowers. Sometimes something related to Jewish history or symbols. Sometimes it's just the name. Sometimes also depends on the time I have to do it, because make these commemorations. It's like it's always on a rush, because I arrive to a place, and if I don't have where to stay, or sometimes I have to do it in the day, and I cannot prepare it before. And sometimes if I find people who host me, they are like very welcoming and all over me, and I don't have time for myself to be alone. And it's hard to find inspiration. So sometimes I start a bit before the memorial. Sometimes I have to do it like in 5 minutes in the rush. Sometimes, yeah, I improvise. Yeah, so I think there's no like one way or one technique.
Mm-hmm. And what about, you mentioned the ritual of breaking the plates, but is there any ritual ceremony of placing this plate at the place where that you chose?
No, usually what I try to do is like document the process, because I think one thing that I discover is like the impact that has for someone to see the village or the house for the first time, but not the house, like even a random house in the. Many people say like, yeah, I want a commemoration, a memorial, but I don't have the address. I was like, doesn't matter, and just seeing like a house, or just seeing like a village, people get very touched. So when I noticed that, I decided, okay, I have to film and take photos of all this, because this is something like relevant for them. So usually I document all this process. with photo and video. So the moment I place those plates, depends if I'm alone or I'm with people, I just place them and I document this.
Mm-hmm. And what process. Happens to those plates later?
I don't know. I sometimes, well, if I can get the community get involved, I know that those plates were going to be preserved. So, for example, or what happened in Sokołów Podlaski, or what happened with communities or with people who are being part of this. But sometimes I go into a village or a town, and I don't manage to have this involvement or this experience. So it's just like an empty walk in this village that still is like enough for the grandsons and daughters. But I just like leave the plates, and I think maybe someone is gonna to remove it, But at first I was worried about this, and for me it was important. Then I say, okay, it's not a big deal, because as I told you, the commemoration is the whole act of memory. So this one is like a kind of a symbol. It's like a coronation maybe, but it's like just one small thing, and doesn't matter if it's not there anymore.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell about a bit more about how the locals perceive you? Because you mentioned a lot of positive experiences with them welcoming you and hosting you. Sometimes you meet nobody, but did you have any negative experience? Someone like being reluctant to what you're doing?
No, I think the negative experience that I had was probably not being able to transmit what I'm doing. But so people, many times people receive me, like mayors receive me in the city hall, and they are happy to welcome me. Sometimes, it's not that easy also to explain. In many places, people doesn't speak English, and I don't speak Polish, or I speak like very, very basic Polish for basic communication, but it's hard to explain the project. Like even in Spanish, for me, it's hard to explain the complexity of all this project. So at the same time, usually people who goes, they are like relatives, not someone else who is going for a relative, and at the same time they are not my friend, I don't know them. So we explain like, there's this guy in Argentina who contacted me to come and to do a commemoration. But so usually they are used to people who want to go and ask for information, and they are used to provide information. But when I say, okay, this is great, but I want something else, like maybe you being part of this, is like maybe many people don't understand why, or what's the relevance, or like for what reason. So I think the negative experience maybe is just like do it alone by myself, but that is not negative, but is not like this village or town like receiving these stories.
Mm-hmm. So this is you talked about Poland, and if you compare it with your experience in other countries, do you see some similarities or differences when it comes to the locals' approach to dealing with the Jewish heritage?
Well, I was that was maybe other of the stereotypes that I had at the beginning or before, that I thought, okay, here people is more distant, is cold, is close. It's not like in South America, but I found out that in villages usually people, the house is like an open space, and they invite me to come in, they invite me to stay. And they are curious and interested. I think depends also in the way you go or approach to these places and how you go. Sometimes, I sometimes people go to a town or a village, and they maybe go straight to the people to ask very personal, delicate information. And, if a stranger comes to me and asks me something, I don't know how I will react. So when I go, usually I just want to meet people, start talking about things, nothing, and like just be part of, I don't know, their gathering, or just like say hello. And when you go maybe with this attitude, it's easy to find people who open themselves just to talk, to have a shot of Bimber or vodka. And after that, when maybe they feel more confident, or maybe they open themselves to talk more about this. But I think it's like a process, and maybe you need time. It's not like a strategy. It's things that happens, but happens because I go with this attitude, and I go with an open attitude, just to meet people and talk, and not looking or expecting from them. It's like I go to do my stuff there, but also to talk to people, and then happens what it happens with this.
And do you feel that your project meets some social need? Like among locals, do you feel that it's filling some gap? Like because you say that they open up. So do you feel that you give them some special platform maybe to?
Maybe I don't know. Maybe there's people that are just like curious and happy to receive a foreigner, like a tourist. I think there's many places there's no, Argentinian is something exotic. Argentinian Lochki is something like more exotic. So it's like a good opportunity just to, go out of the routine. Sometimes it happens that people maybe, need to talk. There was this guy who was called Mateusz. I met him in Białystok because he was a friend of a friend, and he offered me to take me to Zabudów for a memorial. I knew that I could easily take a bus, and it was a moment in the project that I could manage myself. But he said, I want to I can take you. So when we were in the car, we started talking about our grandparents, and he started telling me the story of his grandfather. And I think it was important for him to tell me this story. He said that he always was scared about his grandfather. Was a man who didn't talk that much, and he was. So I think there was something between him and his grandfather, and his grandfather also had a traumatic experience during the war. So I think there was in that moment a need to talk about this. And I also discovered in the last years that there's many people here also looking. For me, always it was like Argentinians or South American looking their roots in Poland. But then I see that there's Polish looking their own roots in Poland, that there's many stories and many untold stories here. And there's also people who wants to know more about this. And maybe this is the people who start talking to me. And it's funny because last week I was in Krakow. I went for an event. And I was in the train, the lady who was sitting next to me in the train, we had 3 hours, so we start talking and we start talking. I told her what I was doing, and she told me her story and say, that my grandfather was from a small village near Wrocław, and I never been there. I was like, if you want, I can go with you. We can make a memorial. So for me, it was very interesting, like a Polish asking me to make a memorial in Poland. And so we're in touch. And so maybe one day, if you decide to go, we can do something.
Yeah, it's interesting that people need this kind of external foreign stimulation. they need an Argentinian guy to realize something. Okay, because I would like to move to your story.
My story,
I would like to move to your story, but if you can briefly say what is the perception of your project in Argentina? Because from what I know, it's quite successful, right?
It was unexpected what happened with the project for me, because when I started, it was because of my own story. Then all what happened after, left my own story to the end, actually. So I think, and at the same time, what happened when I started, I thought it like a traveling project. I will travel doing memorials. So it was a traveling project. And I will travel in a different conducting line. Instead of showing destinations, like, if you go to social media and you see traveling accounts, usually you see resorts, food, like aesthetic places, paradises, beaches, and like mountains and whatever. And I was, okay, my conducting lines are the stories of people who are gone, and the villages or towns where I'm going. It's like there's probably nothing to show, or maybe nothing interested for this kind of people who follows traveling projects. So at the beginning, I was thinking as a traveling project. Then everything mute and transform, and the traveling became like in a second place. And it's a project that talks about memory, identity, roots, and this is the core of the project. And this is like what happened, all the impact that had in Argentina. And after that, after this first trip, the government of Buenos Aires declared this project of cultural interest. So after that, also the Polish embassy in Argentina was interested in collaborate. So we start to cooperate, and then I start to work with some institutions. So everything grew like very quick, and now it's a big part of my work and my daily life. And in Argentina, I think it helped. Well, many people start to got interested in this region, because I was showing like a different region, and at the same time, I told you about the ideas, conceptions, stereotypes that many people, for example, we don't know that much about about people. Many times people say like, my grandfather was from a small village, like from Łódź. I say, okay, this is like a big city. It's not a village. Or many people think that their village or their town doesn't exist anymore. So this is also like a very frequent. This is also a very frequent like thing that I listen. Like, I want a commemoration, but I think this village doesn't exist anymore. I say, how do you know? Are you sure? Because this is what my mother told me. Because and probably it was like that, or maybe their grandparents, it was a way to close something. When they start a new life in Argentina, they say, okay, there's nothing left here. There's nothing for, it's like doesn't exist anymore for me, this place. Or maybe it was that the last thing that they saw about this village was like being on fire or bombed and their family killed. So it was, they were like in part true, like their life there doesn't exist anymore. But this, repetition of doesn't exist is like an empty saying. And so there's people saying doesn't exist without knowing what it means. This doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist in their memory.
Yeah. Right? So I always say, I think, of course, maybe your family house or your family history there is hard to find, or there's nothing there, but the place, the village, the town, for sure, is there. If you want, you can go and sit by yourself, or like, so there's a lot of things that we don't know about this region, and I think this project helps to connect families with their roots, families with their past, connects families with their own history and give also tools to start digging in their own history and motivation to do that. I think, or what I'm trying to do with telling these stories is to make more people get interested and also talk about these topics that probably or talk about these topics in a different or in a new narrative formats, like new technologies, new narrative, like take these topics that to social media and create something in social media and use social media for relevant or important things, like at least for them.
And how many commemorations have you done so far?
More than 50. From 1990, from 2019 to 24.
Within how many trips?
It was 4 trips. Yes.
And they were all like this long, a few months?
No, the first trip was almost 9 months. Then in 2021, I came for 7 months, almost 7 months, and it was mainly 3 months in Poland, 3 months in Lithuania, and 2 weeks in Latvia and 2 weeks in Germany. And then in last year, in 2023, I came for 4 months and a half, and and this year I came for 4 months. But this time I wasn't that focusing. I took a small break of memorials. I did a few, but now what is happening now? This is like a kind of maybe evolution of the project. It's like that this started last year, that a grandson wanted to travel with me, wanted to go to his grandmother's village with me. So he said, I want a commemoration, but I want to be there. I want to go. So that's also a beautiful story. We met in Krakow and all what happened. But I think it's a long story.
Okay, sure.
But so this year also there was a group of people who came, people with Polish roots that came from Argentina, and we did 2 memorials. But we also travel around and to discover the country.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move to the family to your family history, because I would like you to talk about how come you're Argentinian, right?
Yes,
Polish
of course.
So can you tell me where your grandparents came from? But we can start from the beginning, so we can start about yourself, when you were born and who are your parents, and then we can go to grandparents. But just, quickly, we don't have to focus on everyone. Let's focus on the grandparents.
Okay,
so to have the the dates.
So I was born in Buenos Aires, and my parents also were born in Buenos Aires, and then my grandparents in the side of my mother, Matilde and Srul. Srul was from Izvica. Izvica, and Matilde was from Behrata. This is a very small village in the border with Ukraine.
Behrata. Yes, and what was her Jewish name?
It was called Mania in Yiddish. Mania. And they migrated with their families when they were kids, like after the first war. So they migrated to Argentina in between wars, and they met in Argentina. My great-grandfather had a small restaurant in Buenos Aires where my grandmother was working as a waitress, and my grandfather was going for eating there, and they met there. And in the side of my father, my grandparents were from Stoczek, the ones who the owners of those places that I broke. And when we went to Stoczek, I went with my sister, and also my uncle decided to come. He was in Belgium, and we met and went together. And it was very nice. We were received by the director of the school. We had lunch with the director, then the mayor. But then we went to visit one person. My grandfather said that he never wanted to talk about their own history, but he wrote a book, Iskor book, in Yiddish, telling his own story, telling the story of his village, the families who live there, telling about his life. And also this book has a compilation of other stories from different survivors from the village, from Stoczek. So when he didn't want to talk, but he wrote this book. But this book is in Yiddish, so it's like a treasure. It's in my parents' house, and it's like a family treasure. But we don't speak Yiddish, and there's many things that we don't know, we don't understand, and maybe it's expensive to translate. But some years ago, my sister, that she was also researching about this, she translated a few parts, and she was reading this book, and she saw a surname like Postek. So she asked my father, "Do you know?" Because Joel mentioned like a Postek family. You know who they were? And my father didn't know, and it comes that it turns out that this Postek family was a Polish family who hid my great grandparents, the parents of Hannah, my grandmother. They hid them in their house during the war. They hid my great grandparents and 9 more people. They have 11 Jewish people hidden. They have their own house, and then they have like a secondary house, like a kind of for tools and like a gardening, like, so they hide them in this house, and they live next to the forest. And apparently somebody snitched, or the Germans discovered that, so they went there and they killed them all. They killed my great grandparents, and they killed the Postek family who was hidden them there. So the only one who survived was the daughter of this family, Postek, who was at school at that time. So when we were in Stoczek, this girl is still alive. Now she's Mrs. Postek. So we went to visit her, and we share a tea. She's probably 90 years old, 91 years old. She lives in the same house where her parents were living, and next to the house where my family was hidden, and next to the forest where they were like killed. And we share with her tea, and for Postek family I also made a commemoration.
That's incredible. So you visited so you saw the place, and is this place of hiding?
They say that this lady is like old, so it was also her daughter there, and she said that probably it was that house that they point as that it was near the house, because she lives is the same place, the same house, and then.
And were they recognized as the righteous among the nations?
No, because I think there were. She had a lot of recognitions, and this Postek family has some memorial in Stoczek, but I think there's some. For this, I think you need sources who are alive, and I think almost everybody is dead, and I think there's some bureaucracy that, and she didn't care that much, or my sister wanted to postulate, and there are people there who wanted to postulate, but for her was like.
And so, do you know the identities of these 9 people who are in hiding? What are the names of your? Do you know the names of your?
Heikel, of my great grandfather.
Heikel.
Heikel, and my great grandmother. I don't remember.
And the surname? That's something to add later. Sure.
Yes. But that was a very special moment and a very touching and strong moment. But at the same time, all this book that is also part of our story and where we have some information. So I never met my grandfather. He died a few weeks before I was born. So these stories and this book and these photos are like maybe my connection with him.
His name was Joel. Right?
Joel.
And their surname?
Lande.
Lande. Ah, like that. Okay, and can you tell a little bit about how they survived, right? Because Joel's parents tragically died in this hideout.
It was Hannah's parents.
Hannah's parents died tragically in the hideout, and but Hannah and Joel.
They
went to.
Yeah, they were deported to Siberia. So they spent the war in Siberia. That at that moment, Siberia included parts of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. So we know that they were separated for some time. So my grandmother was in a kolkhoz, like in a farm, working, and my grandfather was in a coal mine. So he was working for a while I think it was in Kazakhstan, in a mine. And they managed to send letters to each other when they were separated in Kazakhstan. And this is, we have an original letter because they kept them written in the 40s in Yiddish, like using as much paper as he could. So we have these letters that they sent each other. And we know that they were for a while in contact with the family in Poland by letter. But then they lost the contact, and when they returned to Poland, they didn't want to return to Stoczek. They were in Łódź in a refugee camp, and at that moment they were like this list, and so we, or at least I don't know how the Joel parents and siblings and family was killed.
Mm-hmm. But can you tell something about their departure from Stoczek, because they ended up in Siberia, but they went through
to Białystok. Yeah, the 2nd of October. When the 2nd of October was the date that they gathered. It was 2nd of October of 1939 that my grandparents, Joel and Hannah, they were like a couple already. They were young and they were a couple. They gathered in the market. This is in my grandfather's book. They gather in the market square with other families to decide what to do, and they decide to leave, to take their own path and try to reach Białystok. And my grandfather had some relatives in Białystok, so they stayed in Białystok until the time Jewish from Białystok were deported to Siberia.
Okay. Yes, and you were saying that they were what age, more or less?
They were in the beginning of their 20s. Like I think they arrived to Argentina when they were 25. Mm-hmm. And also arriving to Argentina wasn't easy. First, they didn't have money for the ticket. It was my grandfather's brother who sent them the tickets. But in that moment, they couldn't enter to Argentina, so they had to go to Paraguay. So they spent 6 months in Paraguay until they could enter to Argentina. So, and that's also part of the story that we don't know how was this time in Paraguay
And the family from Izbica.
Yes.
They came to. How old was your grandfather? Right, it was your grandfather that was from Izbica.
Yes.
When he came to Argentina, he was
he was a kid. I think it was after the First War. So he and also my grandmother was like a kid. So this is why they also didn't talk that much about Poland. And for example, my grandparents in my father's side, they were speaking in Yiddish. Their language was Yiddish. They immigrated when they were 25, so they were like, their language was Yiddish. So they were talking to my father and my uncle in Yiddish, and they always they kept speaking in Yiddish. My Srul and Matilde, those grandparents, their language was Spanish, and they didn't know how to speak Polish or Yiddish. And I think my in that side, my Srul, he died when I was 9 years old, and my grandmother when I was 21.
And so, how were the Jewish traditions cultivated? Like, were those families religious or?
Well, they were not religious, but we were keeping like the tradition. I went to a Jewish school, so so my family, they weren't religious. We kept traditions. I went to a Jewish school, like kindergarten school, high school. I did my bar mitzvah. I was part of the community, but we always see like being Jewish as being part of a community and being part of these traditions. But but I think we were not religious, and we celebrate Pesach, and we celebrate Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and these festivities.
And so, how much this Polish past was present?
So I think wasn't like clearly present. I think was present in a way we couldn't perceive it was present, because we didn't talk about Poland, and we were not feeling like part of this story. This is, like a Polish community in Argentina. They gather as a community, like Polish, like Catholics community, but Jewish. They were not like Ashkenazi Jewish were all mixed, like Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Polish, Belarusian. Like there was not like organized by countries or nationalities. We were like a community as a Jewish community. So this is also part of the misinformation or confusion that many people didn't know if their grandparents were like Ukrainians or Polish, or they repeat what they listened, but they were not sure. And the borders at that time were like moving, so there was not that present, this nationality. But at the same time, for example, when I came for the first time to Poland or other places in Eastern Europe, I saw a lot of things that remind me to my grandmother or grandparents, their house, like in the liquors or the cakes, or in the food, or in some traditions or things people do. So I think maybe Poland somehow was present, or this Polish Jewish identity was present, but I didn't know anything about Poland, so I couldn't recognize that at that moment.
And the grandparents who went through the war in this part of Europe, did they talk about it at all?
This is. I never met Joel, and Hannah. She died when I was a kid, like 5 or 6 years old. So I never had the opportunity to talk with them. But I remember her in a totally different way as my other grandmother, that the war was present on her because she was distant, and you know, I wasn't feeling like totally comfortable when I was going to her house. It was like you know, like an atmosphere that there was no like a happiness in the house. And in my other grandparents' house, it was the opposite. Yeah.
But yeah. Did your parents
yeah. So I think my father knew or some stuff, but I think it was hard for him also to ask. So they didn't talk that much about this. So maybe there were some people from Stock. Well, they call Stoczek Stock in Yiddish. So there were some people from the village that also migrated to Argentina. So sometimes my father knew like friends or of my grandfather who were visiting the house, and they were from the village, and maybe there were some stories, some things, but he wasn't. They didn't have like a communication channel to talk about these things.
But I understand that the family that came from Stoczek before the war, the Stoczek, yes, Stoczek, Siberia, yes. So that the family that came from Stoczek and brought the plates,
yeah,
they had this material heritage with them.
But the place was one of the first things they got from in Argentina. They didn't bring it. It was like they came with nothing or almost nothing, and one of the first things they got in Argentina was those plates.
I understand. Okay, yeah. I wanted to ask if they came with anything else.
Yes.
No. Mm-hmm. If you compare because you've been to Poland for quite some time, and so you can get the vibe of how we deal with history here, and how present the burden of the war is here, specifically in Warsaw, but also in the whole Poland. How heavy it is here, how many commemorations there are, memorials, museums. And if you compare it to, knowing that, if you compare it to your Argentinian background and Jewish background in Argentina, I wonder if you got some new perspectives, or you can tell something about it. How do you feel with this kind of war being so present here?
Yes, I think I was surprised the first time I came here with. I thought that I was not gonna find like many things regarding to the Jewish heritage and the story, but I was surprised by this, and also by the interest of the people here about this, and you can feel like the presence of the war. In many places, and there's always like in doesn't matter in any small village in the main square, there's a commemoration about the people killed during the war, and you can see this, and I at the beginning maybe I was surprised because we maybe in Argentina we knew about the work they did in Germany of remembering like and all the process, but we don't know that much about what's going on in Poland, and also there's also like all what happened here is kind of there's a lot of misinformations or like or cross information. So yeah.
And how about the Holocaust education in Argentina?
In Argentina, So, well, I think the Holocaust is part of the official program in schools, but since I went to a Jewish school, it was much more present. I think we visit like a museum, like a Holocaust museum in Buenos Aires, the Holocaust Museum in Buenos Aires. Also, we had like when I was a kid, I remember in high school we have visits of survivors telling their stories. So, and we had we watch movies, we have talks. I think was something that also marked. Actually, no, I think the library of the school was called Anna Frank. So I think in my school was very present. Yeah, in the educational system in Argentina, I think it's like it is the Holocaust is topic. It's an official topic, but I cannot say how it's how it works, how it's teach. Yeah.
And do you take part currently in the Jewish life in Buenos Aires? Jewish community, how big it is?
It's a big community. I was when I was younger, I was much more into it. I was the moment I did my bar mitzvah, I was part of the groups in the synagogue, like camping and all these activities. And I also was attending to sports, like a Jewish sports club when I was 18, 19. But now I'm I think after this project, then I took maybe a different path when I started the university and my work, and maybe I was a bit outside the community. And I think with this project, it's like part of my activities, my life brought me back to to the community or to some activities.
I imagine that this is the platform for your project, an important place where you can find people interested in your activities.
Yes, but one thing like a surprising thing is that many of the people who follows this project and who is part of the people who active like is part of the community who collaborate is like it's not Jewish people, and it's like and I also I do memorials and commemoration for everybody who asks me. It's not exclusive like of Jewish people, and I made memorials for Christian Orthodox families and Catholic families and part of the people who follow this project, maybe they are not Jewish, and this is also a way to know or learn a bit about the Holocaust and Jewish history. And many people is people really interested in these topics. Mm-hmm. So it's not only attached to the Jewish community in Argentina, it's like to the community like in general, and community who like also these kind of stories and who see themselves reflected in the stories, besides they have like Italian or Spanish roots or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And can you tell about the title of the project? Because I think
I think we didn't mention, right? Yeah. The project is called La Ruta de las Bobes. That means Bobe is a babcha in Yiddish. So it's the road of the babchas, the Bobes. Mm-hmm.
So I would like to finish with asking you, how would you describe your relationship with Poland currently? And this girl at school asked you, do you feel like a Polish, like a Pole, or would you imagine yourself living in Poland? So I would like you to maybe try to answer this now. So that would be the question of about your identity after this whole experience.
Yes, let me think a bit.
Sure.
So that's a good question. I don't know if I imagine myself living in Poland, but actually I'm like spending like a lot of months every year here. So I don't know. I feel very Argentinian, and this is something that maybe happened with Argentina or countries in South America. We're like new countries, and this sense of the country and being part of a country is like very strong. So I feel my identity first as Argentinian Jew. But after, I got usually it comes together, like the identity maybe with the nation and the citizenship. With the Polish citizenship was like the opposite. I was a citizen before coming to Poland. So I think it's like a different way of seeing like a nationality, something like how, I don't know, maybe how to approach my identity or my relation with Poland is what things I start to discover. And these kind of approaches, I think my identity is related to what I was telling you, how different ways of I start to feel connected. So I think identities works in different ways, and nationalities works in different ways. So for example, my Argentinian nationality is something that I don't think about and I don't question and I don't, it's like a certain thing. But with Polish, it's like it's something that I have to learn being an adult. Like, it's like start learn how to ride a bike when you are an adult, or how to. So I'm starting to learn what things connect me to the country, and I think my identity comes from this part, like trying to discover and think and explore what things are related to my history and my grandparents now I see here, and what things I start to feel close to my here in Poland, to my own identity. I don't know. I think it's a question that still don't have like, or maybe can have different answers, or like an answer that is going to evolve along the time. But yeah, it's something new for me.